So we will cover in today's class lactation, overview of breast anatomy, modifications, and how we make milk. And then we will transition into the conversation around chest and breastfeeding, whether it's exclusively offering the breast or a combination, pumping and bottle feeding. And then we'll go over some common questions and challenges, and then transition into infant feeding options, which kind of cover the gamut of all of your options, including formula and other variational sources of getting milk and where we get it from. So want you to let go of any ideas that you have about how you feed your baby and how that correlates to you being a parent. Right? We also get wrapped up in, like, particularly in the breastfeeding culture, particularly there, that, oh, well, if I can't do it, or if I don't want to do it, like, I'm embarrassed to tell people that, or that someone's going to have an opinion about that, like that whether or not it makes me a good parent, right? Baloney, baloney, baloney. We have to tell ourselves that before we can even admit it to anybody else, that this does not correlate to you being a good parent. Not at all. If you don't feed your baby, that's a whole different story, but you need to feed your baby, right? But yeah, some people think there's just like one opening and that the milk comes out. And so I want you to know that these milk duct orifices are plentiful, that there, again, can be up to 20 of them in which the milk can be released from the nipple. There are various nipple shapes. Explore your own body. I want you to be aware of, do you have dimpled nipples in which only a part of your nipple protrudes? The nipple can be pulled out, but it does not stay that way, for example. Maybe only one side has a variation, it's meaning that they're not the same on both sides. And you can have inverted or flat nipples. So how do we know what the differences are between that? So if you were to take your hand like in a C shape behind the nipple on the areola, and if you were to stimulate the nipple and or push on it, does it become erect and does it stay erect? Does it not respond at all, or does it invert and kind of go within? So that's one way for you to kind of test and see. Preparation is key, but what I'm not talking about is like the common like myth that we need to roughen up our nipples and get them ready. Like that is a myth. That is not something. I not want to see you taking a hairbrush to your nipples to try to toughen them up. Like, please do not do that. Again, what it might mean is that you're assessing the ability for the nipple to stay erect once it's stimulated, and do you need any support for that otherwise? All right, so let's dive into lactation-specific education. Your body is designed to make milk. You will begin making milk, specifically colostrum, during pregnancy. This is the first milk that your baby will have. It's highly concentrated. It is called lactogenesis 1, when your body starts making milk in pregnancy. So most all people, regardless of their desire to actually have an extended breastfeeding relationship or to put the baby to rest at all, will have colostrum during pregnancy and at birth. Lactogenesis 2 is the process of the body stimulating prolactin receptors and the oxytocin hormones that are the hormonally driven aspects of breastfeeding. And so this is really reliant on having direct skin-to-skin contact with your baby in the first 3 days after birth that stimulate the prolactin receptors that pretty much set you up for the rest of your breastfeeding experience with that baby. That's not to say that we can't overcome challenges or have supply and demand that fluctuates, but the supply is literally based on the amount of prolactin receptors that are initiated in this very early part of your breastfeeding relationship, which is those first 1 to 3 days when it's all hormonally driven. Lactogenesis 3 is when the milk supply is established through supply and demand. So it's no longer hormonally driven, but it's based on how often you stimulate the breast and how often you're extracting milk from the breast specifically. The saliva from your baby interacts with the flow of milk in your body, and it will adjust adjust and vary based on the salivary content being introduced to your body. So for example, antibodies that are produced in your body in response to your baby's saliva and things that they've been introduced to in their microbiome. And also the richness and or constitution of breast milk evolves and changes from day to day or month to month, or, well, let me back up, even hourly to hourly. Like morning milk might look different than afternoon milk or midnight milk. Things like that. And again, over time, as your baby grows, the constitution of your breast milk will change to meet their individual needs, which is, I think, just amazing and magical and science. That's awesome. It is also the baby's first introduction to the cannabinoid system in their body. And the cannabinoid system is something that is naturally in our bodies that when activated helps us to feel peaceful. It helps babies to sleep better. And the thing I want to mention here about that is sleeping and breastfeeding is that a lot of people are like, oh, well, I want to need to make sure that the baby never falls asleep at the breast because I don't want to get into that habit, or like that's a trap. Like then they're always going to want to need to be at the breast to fall asleep. Milk is the magic juice that makes babies fall asleep. Like, so don't like deny that this is a wonderful gift that nature has provided to us. And you, of course, as parents will determine what works for you and your lifestyle. But I want to take the fear out of this idea that they will always need the breast to fall asleep forevermore, because that is not true. But it is a wonderful, wonderful way to help you and your baby get more sleep, more efficiently, more often. Let's talk for a minute about partners and feedings. This is a really common thing that people like to ask about, which is like, you know, well, how do I incorporate my partner in this feeding process? Number one, I think it's important to just determine what's most important in your family and your individual lifestyle. You know, how important is it for someone else to be able to feed your baby? Is there a high need within your lifestyle or your family unit for someone else to be able to feed your baby? And then how are they going to do that? And this can also feel very isolating in that regard. How many people are comfortable sitting out in a room pumping? That's a very different experience than discreetly nursing your baby in public. You're more likely to isolate yourself to pump. Build up an additional supply in the refrigerator or freezer. We recommend starting with at least one additional pump per day beyond what your baby is eating, and to do that in the morning. In the first feed of the morning is when you typically have the most milk available that you are making. So it's the first feed of the day, and you put the baby to breast first and then pump what's left. Expressing milk and you're putting it in the refrigerator. My go-to plan was always to have a large mason jar, and I knew that I could have milk in the refrigerator for up to 6 days before I needed to put it in the freezer. And so if I pumped, because I was at work or whatever, I would put that milk in the refrigerator and allow it to come to the same temperature as the milk that's already in there. This is key and really important. Both things need to be the same temperature. And then once it was at the same temperature, I would add it to the large jar. And that way I was able to parcel out how much I wanted to fill my breast bags with. So did I want 2 ounces per bag or 4 ounces per bag or 6 ounces per bag? You know, depending upon the age of the baby is how much milk they're going to be taking in and how much they're going to need and how much you want to defrost for any individual time that you're going to be gone, right? So that might mean, like, I know I'm going to be gone for 8 hours. The baby feeds every 2 hours and they're getting 2 ounces at every feed. Then I'm going to need to take an 8-ounce bag. One of the things I'm going to ask you to resist thinking about is that when you do this and whatever you see coming out and you're expressing, this idea that maybe that's all your baby is getting to. Like, oh, I'm only able to express a little bit. Like, gosh, again, am I sure my baby's getting enough? Like, this can't be enough for them. So what I want you to remember is that babies are more efficient at drawing out fluid from the breast than your hand or any pump out there, right? So Trust that your baby will be getting what they need because they're the best milk movers out there. So I do recommend not just relying on that day one hospital lactation consultant that came in to see you before you got discharged, but following up with an IDCLC, following up on day 2, 3, or even 4, or at any time really that you feel like there's still something problematic happening. I feel like the evolution of the baby's mouth and the ability to suckle and really use their jaw muscles changes in the hours after birth and days and weeks after birth. And sometimes it can be related to other issues like, for example, torticollis is one of these issues that can create a common feeding challenge, which may also contribute to facial asymmetry, neck asymmetry. Torticollis is going to be, there's 2 different types of infant torticollis, which is congenital and or acquired. So congenitally can be just an asymmetry in the musculature, skeletal makeup of their bones, and how that affects how the muscles are aligned in their body. An acquired torticollis can be achieved either in utero from a baby that's like wedged into the pelvis due to some musculoskeletal imbalance in the maternal person, which has caused the baby to like be wedged in like, you know, asynclitic in some funky way throughout the entire pregnancy, or even in the birth canal. So let's say you have an extended 4-hour pushing period and your baby's head was asynclitic or off to the side. And these babies are often born with what we call a caput that's over off to a side. So they'll have a protruding knot on the back of their head or somewhere that's not center, not midline on their head, but it'll be off to the side. And we know that baby was wedged in the birth canal in a wonky position for an extended period of time, or they wouldn't have that swelling. Here's some resources for local areas. Please do not hesitate to reach out and get WIC or SNAP food assistance. If you feel at all like your resources are limited to properly care for your own nutrition during pregnancy and breastfeeding. It is free and available for all pregnant and breastfeeding people. Like if I had an EBT card with $200 on it to help me make sure that I had good nutritious snacks for every time I sit down to breastfeed my baby, I'm gonna take it. Like, because I work hard and I pay my taxes, and it's a subsidy that's available for people. So please don't hesitate to reach out for that kind of support if you feel like it would be helpful to you. I also want to bring up the point that the American Academy of Pediatrics does recommend that we exclusively breastfeed for up to 6 months. Okay, exclusively breastfeed for up to 6 months, and then to continue for a year or longer as mutually desired. We do not have systems in place in the US that support this statement, right? So that also sets us up for failure if we are not able to achieve this. You can also find a lactating person that you trust. This one's a little more controversial, I know, right? Depending again on our social and cultural influences. This might seem like a ick, or, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. Like my sister, or, you know, my neighbor, or like the person who's going to be watching my baby every day. Like they're a lactating person, and I'm going to have them go through a process of screening and I trust them, or, you know, whatever values are important to you that kind of align, that's a possibility as well. And this can look like a baby that latches directly to their breast, and or they pump and then give your baby a bottle, right? So that would still be considered donor milk as well. If you are unfamiliar with different ways to actually literally feed that don't involve the breast and the bottle, I want to introduce you to silicone feeding cups and the supplemental nursing system. It is not normal for a baby who has been feeding and eating well to start resisting or become uninterested in feeding, okay? That's going to be a sign or an indication that something is wrong. If a baby is too tired to wake up to feed, or if they're suddenly just not feeding on their normal schedule, it's different than a baby who starts feeding more often, right? Like we know that increased feeding is correlative to growth spurts and other types of emotional changes and evolvements as the baby. It's almost always like we just had a really rough night and all baby wanted to do was eat or sleep, and they're going through some kind of a growth spurt. It's very different than a baby who becomes uninterested and or changes the frequency to the negative, where they're not eating and eating well.